Good afternoon, and welcome to this year's Henry Russell Awards program and lecture. This is a very special event in the university's calendar, the day we honor a colleague with the highest distinction the institution can bestow, the Russell Lectureship. The 2021 Henry Russell Lecturer is Susan Galvin, who will be introduced to you shortly. But first, I would like to share a little bit about the history of the namesake of the Russell Award. Henry Russell earned 3 degrees from the University of Michigan: a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1873, a law degree in 1875, and then a Master's of Arts degree in 1876. Russell was born in Detroit and remained in Michigan after graduation, where he was a successful lawyer and prosperous in business. He was involved with the Michigan Central Railroad, the Michigan State Telephone Company, the Union Trust Company, People's State Bank, and the Detroit Steel Products Company. He was the type of entrepreneurial graduate of the University of Michigan that helps our state to thrive. In February of 1920, while in New York City, Russell took ill and died at age 67 from pneumonia, just as he was preparing to travel to Europe to claim his son's body. His son, Lieutenant William M. Russell, was killed in aerial combat during World War I. In his will, Henry Russell left the University of Michigan a $10,000 bequest to create an endowment fund. His one stipulation was that the income from the endowment would be used for additional compensation to members of the instructional staff. In May of 1925, the Regents established the Henry Russell Lecture as a way to recognize a senior member of the faculty with an honorarium of $250 funded by Russell's endowment. Moreover, $250 was also dedicated for an additional award to honor a faculty member below the rank of professor for conspicuous service to the university. Although the funds from Russell's bequest have long ago run out, the university continues to honor its most accomplished faculty with the award in his name. I'm honored to be involved in today's ceremony to recognize these outstanding faculty members. I would like to invite Provost Susan M. Collins to present the Henry Russell Awards to 4 faculty members.
Thank you very much. I am just truly honored to be here to present the awards to the 2021 Henry Russell awardees. First, I would like to recognize Professor Jose Casas. Playwright Jose Casas is a leading voice in Latino theater in the United States and a pioneer in the creative use of ethnographic and documentary playwriting techniques. He has written and directed more than 25 plays, including Desfalado, Pedro y el Lobo, JJ's Place, and Flint, which explores the implications of the Flint water crisis through narratives inspired by the lives and stories of the people who continue to endure the impact of that crisis. A true advocate for children's theater and the impact of storytelling on young actors and audiences, he is a member of the Dramatists Guild and Theater for Young Audiences, and a trustee of the Children's Theater Foundation of America. His plays, La Ofrenda and Somebody's Children, were recipients of both the Bonderman National Playwriting for Youth Award and the American Alliance of Theater and Education's Distinguished Play Award. His book, Palabras del Cielo, an exploration of Latino theater for young audiences, was a recipient of an AATE Distinguished Book Award and a 2019 North Campus Dean's MLK Spirit Award. Professor Casas, in recognition of your dedication to Latino and youth theater, your teaching and your service, the University of Michigan is truly pleased to present to you the Henry Russell Award. Congratulations. It's wonderful to honor you. Next, it's my pleasure to recognize Professor Aaron Sack. Sociology and mechanical engineering professor Aaron Sack has made valuable contributions in understanding the persistence of gender-based and other inequalities in careers in science, technology, engineering, and math known as STEM. Her research examines the cultural mechanisms of inequality and how it is reproduced through processes that are built into seemingly innocuous cultural beliefs and practices. She examines inequality in the recruitment and retention of women, LGBT, and underrepresented racial and ethnic minority students in STEM professions, as well as how cultural understandings of the extent and origin of inequality help to uphold unequal social structures. She has published more than 27 articles in leading peer-reviewed journals, including Science Advances, the American Journal of Sociology, and the American Sociological Review. Her article, The Changing Career Trajectories of New Parents in STEM, was selected in 2019 as one of the 10 most influential studies to appear in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. In 2020, she was named one of the Business Equality magazine's 40 LGBT plus leaders under 40. Professor Seck, in recognition of your research and your contributions in the fields of social inequality and cultural sociology, your teaching, and your service, the University of Michigan is pleased to present you the Henry Russell Award. Congratulations. Next, we recognize Professor Matthew Davis. Health sciences researcher Matthew Davis is a national leader in the use of data science to inform health policy. His research focuses on leveraging large sources of data to study policy-relevant issues regarding health and healthcare use. He has also developed methods to use social media data to measure public opinion and social support for health services. His work has made important contributions to a variety of areas, including the identification of dietary sources of arsenic exposure among children in the US and the tracking of the national opioid epidemic. His current research investigates the quality of care for older adults with dementia. He has been first author or senior author on 37 studies published in journals such as Health Affairs, JAMA Internal Medicine, and the American Journal of Public Health. A gifted educator, he has developed his teaching content from scratch to make data science engaging for healthcare professionals and students. In 2019, he received the School of Nursing's May Edna Doyle Teacher of the Year Award. Professor Davis, in recognition of your innovative use of data science, your outstanding teaching, and your service, the University of Michigan is pleased to present you the Henry Russell Award. Congratulations. And now it is my pleasure to recognize Professor Johanna Mathieu. Electrical engineering and computer science professor Johanna Mathieu is a national leader on research to reduce environmental impact, cost, and inefficiency of electrical power systems. Her work focuses on the development of new strategies to actively engage distributed flexible resources, such as energy storage devices, electric loads, and small-scale renewable energy sources. This work is improving the power grid's reliability, economics, and environmental impact. She has published more than 32 papers in leading journals and is an editor of IEEE Transactions on Power Systems. Additionally, she was one of 82 young engineers nationwide selected to participate in the National Academy of Engineering's 2019 U.S. Frontiers of Engineering Symposium. As an educator, she has developed 2 graduate-level courses in power systems that attract students from a variety of disciplines, and restructured an undergraduate course focused on grid integration of alternative energy sources to enable a wider variety of student participation. In addition, she co-developed the short course Grid 101 and created the Interdisciplinary Power System Seminar Series. Professor Mathieu, in recognition of your significant contributions to improving the environmental and economic impacts of energy systems, your outstanding teaching, and your service, the University of Michigan is pleased to present you the Henry Russell Award. Congratulations. And now it is my pleasure to turn the proceedings over to President Mark Schlissel.
Thank you very much, Provost Collins, and congratulations again to all of the Henry Russell awardees. I now recognize Professor Susan Gelman. Psychology and linguistics professor Susan Gelman is a world leader in the field of psychological science. She's spent the past 30 years at the forefront of research and theory on cognitive development. Her work aims to understand how children organize their experiences into categories, how they construct theories to explain the world, and the role of language in these processes. Her research, which has been funded by the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development and the National Science Foundation, among others, has transformed the understanding of the process of language acquisition and conceptual development, and has contributed significantly to understanding human rationality. Professor Gelman joined the University of Michigan in 1984 and has served both as Associate Dean and Interim Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. She's also held leadership roles in several academic societies, including the Society for Philosophy and Psychology, the Cognitive Development Society, and the Annual Review of Developmental Psychology. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Psychological Association, and a member of the National Academy of Sciences. She was also named the Heinz Werner Distinguished University Professor of Psychology and Linguistics. Professor Gelman, in recognition of your numerous research contributions, exemplary leadership, outstanding teaching, and service, the University of Michigan is honored to present you with the Henry Russell Lectureship. Congratulations. Please join me in welcoming the 2021 Henry Russell Lecturer, Susan Gelman, who will speak on From Socrates to Darwin and Beyond, What Children Can Teach Us About the Human Mind. Congratulations again, Susan. I look forward to your lecture.
Thank you, President Schlissel, for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here today. I'm really so grateful for this honor and for the incredible support from the university over the years. When I came here for my on-campus interview back in 1983, I was in my 4th year of graduate school. I hadn't yet even started my dissertation, and I was so nervous during my job talk that I spilled water all over my notes, not once, but twice. Despite that, Michigan offered me a job. I moved to Ann Arbor the following fall, and it's been an amazing intellectual home for me ever since. I'd like to start by acknowledging the challenging moment that we're in. It was almost exactly a year ago that the campus closed down because of the pandemic. And since then, COVID has killed over 500,000 people in the US and 2.5 million worldwide. On top of that, during the past year, we've seen horrific racial injustices, anti-Black violence, political polarization, and fierce debates over everything from immigration policy to mask wearing. How we got here is, of course, a complex question with no easy answer. But one common thread is that categories are front and center. The world doesn't come pre-packaged into Democrats versus Republicans, or borders between nations, or Black lives versus blue lives. But over and over, we see these divides between groups at the heart of moral and political debates. So this terrible year provides a backdrop for a question that's motivated my research throughout my career, namely, how and why do we form the categories that we do? What do categories do for us? Now, the textbooks tell us that categories increase efficiency. They're a way to organize experience into manageable chunks. And although I think that's true, I don't think that can be the whole story, because when we put something into a category, we're doing so much more than just sorting facts into folders. Instead, I think of a category as more like a miniature theory. So consider this wolf pup. We have a whole set of expectations that derive from knowing that it is a wolf. Even though it looks adorable now, we expect it to grow up to be a ferocious beast. Even if it were raised by humans, it has an innate predisposition that will win out in the end. So we can graph it out roughly like this. The idea here is that what an animal is not based just on its appearance, but rather a deeper reality. And furthermore, there's some inborn, invisible, unchanging quality that causes the appearance and the deeper reality. And we could call this the essence. Now, we might think the essence is the wolf's DNA, or maybe something that runs through its blood. Often, we may not even know what the essence is. We just have a belief that there is an essence. I call this mini theory psychological essentialism. Now, essentialism is a powerful idea. It allows us to accept that this is a legless lizard and not a snake, that this is a leaf insect and not a leaf. This is pyrite, not gold. These are bats, not birds. These are dolphins, not fish. Essentialism might even motivate us to search for new features that haven't been discovered yet. But at the same time, essentialism oversimplifies. It leads to misconceptions about race. For example, most Americans surveyed agree with the false statement that two people from the same race will always be more genetically similar to each other than two people from different races. And another example is essentialism can lead to treating social distinctions, such as caste or social class, as if they're natural and inevitable and fixed. Essentialism also predicts a wide range of social consequences for adults. I'll tell you about just a few of the ways that we've looked at these consequences in recent years. So essentialism of race and gender, religion, predicts stereotyping and prejudice. Essentialism plays a role in how people categorize those with one white and one Black parent, such as treating President Obama as Black but not white. Essentialist beliefs about criminality correspond to more punitive judgments, including support for the death penalty. And essentialism leads to support for boundary enhancing policies. I'll say just a bit more about what I mean by that. This is from a recent paper that was led by Stephen Roberts, who was a U of M grad student and is now a faculty member at Stanford. We found that people who are more essentialist also endorse public policies that involve enhancing boundaries. These include those that are designed to harm, such as building a border wall or banning Muslims from the US, as well as those designed to help, such as single-sex classrooms. Now, importantly, these effects hold even when controlling for other factors like education level, political conservatism, religiosity. So essentialism is important, and my question is, why do we do this? The approach that I've taken is to look at where these beliefs come from in children. And this actually follows a long-standing tradition. Over the centuries, philosophers and scientists have looked to children to answer big questions about human nature. Herodotus, Socrates, Darwin, Jean Piaget all considered data with children. Their methods varied, but their goal was the same, namely, to learn what's most fundamental and basic in the human mind. The idea is that by studying children, we can sort of peel back those layers of experience that all of us have as adults and that underlie our adult thinking. So what can children tell us about essentialism? When I first posed this question some 30 years ago, the received wisdom was that young children focus on here and now, whatever is in their most immediate concrete experience. And in fact, there's massive evidence that in the first few years of life, children are captivated by superficial appearances. For example, 4-year-olds think that if you pour water from one container into a taller, skinnier container, now there's more water. Or if they're asked to sort objects into categories, they rely on superficial appearances. like putting a fire engine with an apple because they're both red, or a birthday cake with a hat because they have the same shape. But children aren't born into a world where they have to build categories from scratch. From the time they're infants, children are learning words from the people around them. Words like dog and wolf, girl and boy, nice and mean. These words tell them which categories are important. So I think the more interesting question is not what categories do children create when they're left to their own devices, but instead I've asked, what do children expect about those categories that are passed down from generation to generation through language? To put this another way, of course, a 4-year-old doesn't know how to draw the line between dogs and wolves, but once you tell them, this is a wolf, this is a dog, what do they do with those labels? What inferences follow? And when we shift to this question, when we ask what children think a category does for them, this reveals a host of inferences that we hadn't seen before. We've interviewed thousands of children over the years in my lab, in local schools and preschools, and in local museums through a partnership called the Living Lab. Now, of course, we can't come right out and ask children the kinds of survey questions that you might ask adults. So instead, we devised a variety of different tasks to get converging evidence on how kids think about this issue. And what we found is that children embrace essentialism. I'd like to give you a sense of how kids are thinking by zipping through some of our key findings with young children. Preschoolers treat categories as having an underlying reality. So let me first explain to you that this animal is a legless lizard. So of course it looks very much like a snake, but biologically it's a lizard. Now, if you tell children that this is a lizard, and this is a lizard, and this is a snake, then they report that the legless lizard and the lizard with legs have the same kinds of insides. So even though one doesn't really look like a lizard, in fact looks more like a snake, it will share non-obvious properties with another lizard. Preschoolers say that nature overrides nurture. So a baby rabbit raised by monkeys will grow up to like carrots and be good at hopping. And a baby boy raised on an island with only women and girls will grow up to like trucks and football. They think that category boundaries are objectively correct. So even if a group of people from far away said that these are the same kind of person, they couldn't possibly be right. And this extends to culturally specific ethnic categories. For example, secular Jewish children in Israel likewise think that individuals who are Muslim Arab and those who are Orthodox Jewish are objectively different kinds of people. Children say that internal body parts affect personality and behavior. So if they swapped hearts with a pig and had a pig's heart inside of them, they think they would end up acting and feeling a bit more like a pig. And if they swapped hearts with a child who's mean, they would end up acting a bit meaner. This is not just kids, by the way. We found that up to 50% of adults sampled in the US and up to 70% of adults we sampled in India have the same beliefs. So to recap, in a variety of different ways, these tests converge on a portrait of young children as little essentialists. By preschool age, children think that certain categories have a deep-seated, unchanging biological basis. An important point here is that these findings don't just come from people in the US. Each of the pins on this map represents a part of the world where research teams have studied essentialism. This isn't an exhaustive set, but it represents dozens of papers or books with over 7,000 participants. Many of these studies use the experimental tools of psychology. Others make use of rich ethnographic evidence from anthropology. But regardless, researchers have found that both children and adults from many different societies essentialize. At the same time, if we look across all this work, we see an interesting pattern. When people are asked about the natural world, different kinds of animals, different kinds of plants, people consistently essentialize. But when people are asked about the social world, different kinds of people, the results vary quite a bit. Whether someone essentializes race or ethnicity or occupation varies depending on what the category is, who the perceiver is, and what the cultural context is. So I think this suggests two things. One, essentialism is what we might call easy to think. It's a basic reasoning bias. But two, culture and experience matter. In recent years, we've been interested in better understanding some of the ways that culture and experience can shape essentialism. And I'd like to illustrate with two examples from our own work. The first example comes from a dissertation conducted by my former PhD student, Marjorie Rhodes, who's now a professor at NYU. We looked at two towns in Michigan, only about 75 miles apart, but different in a number of ways, including population size, ethnic and racial diversity, political views, education, and average income. So we're not going to try to separate these factors, but just focus on these as two distinct communities. And we can call them college town and small town. College town was larger, more ethnically and racially diverse, more liberal, with higher levels of parent education and income. Small town was smaller, less ethnically and racially diverse, more conservative, and had lower levels of parent education and income. We tested children in both communities from kindergarten through 12th grade. And we gave them a test that measured essentialism. Now, as you might expect, we found no differences between the two communities and how they reasoned about animals like dogs and cats. Essentialism tended to be quite high in both towns at all ages. We also found no differences in how they reasoned about simple artifacts like chairs and tables. Here, essentialism was much lower in both towns at all ages. But where we did see differences was in how they reasoned about the two social categories that we looked at, which were gender and race. So let me first show you what we found with gender. And here, the dark blue bars are the responses from the children in college town. The light blue were from the children in small town. And as you can see, in college town, children started out highly essentialist about gender, but that declined with age. In contrast, in small town, children also started out highly essentialist about gender, but that stayed high over age. It never dipped. Okay, now let's look at race. In college town, children started out low in race essentialism, and that stayed low over age. And in small town, children also started out low in race essentialism, but that actually increased with age. So overall, we see at the youngest ages, children in the two towns actually look indistinguishable. From ages 5 to 7, they are typically essentialist about gender, but not race. But then by about 10 years of age on up, the two towns start to diverge. So even though both groups were matched for age, even though children in both groups were attending public schools, and even though the towns were in neighboring counties in the same state, the patterns in these two communities were qualitatively different. I think that suggests something important. It suggests there must be something about children's experiences that either push down essentialism in the case of college town or push up essentialism in the case of small town. Okay, so now I'd like to turn to my second example. And this is not a comparison of different communities, but rather an in-depth look at children whose own personal experiences seem to challenge essentialism. So consider Jazz Jennings, a transgender girl who was born a boy at birth. For her, gender was not stable over time, and biology was not destiny. We wondered if a child like Jazz would essentialize gender, and this is something that we've recently started to look at. This is part of a larger project headed by Professor Christina Olson at Princeton University. The team members include 3 U of M graduate students, Rachel Fine, Emma Gross, and Celine Gulgos. Celine is now a professor at Fordham. We're interviewing children who feel from a young age that their gender identity doesn't match their sex at birth. We call these transgender children. We're also interviewing children whose gender identity and biological sex match. We call these cisgender children. And we're interviewing a third group as well, cisgender children who are siblings of the transgender children. The transgender children and their siblings are special interest because their lived experience runs counter to some essentialist ideas. It contradicts the idea that gender doesn't change, and it contradicts the idea that gender is rooted in biology. So these children provide an important test case for the robustness of essentialist beliefs under different experiences. We used 2 tasks. First, we wanted to see whether transgender children make inferences about people based on their sex at birth. And second, we wanted to see whether transgender children think that gender is inborn. And in both of these studies, we compared the 3 groups that I mentioned before. Okay, so I'm going to share with you some of our initial findings. These are the results from the first task that asked whether children think that a child's sex at birth will determine their later preferences. For example, will a boy raised in an all-female environment want to play with dolls? Will that boy want to play football? And so forth. The blue lines show the responses for each of the 3 groups over age. Everything above the red line is showing an essentialist pattern. And as you can see, all 3 groups essentialize gender. They said that a child's sex at birth would determine their later preferences, that it would override the environment. For example, a boy raised on an island with his aunt and female cousins will grow up to want to play football. With a separate group of children, we asked whether they view gender as inborn. For example, Andrew is a boy now. Was Andrew born a boy? As you can see, all 3 groups agree. They show an essentialist pattern of response. But at the same time, we do see less essentialism in transgender children and in their siblings compared to the cisgender group. What happens when we ask children about gender identity? For example, Charles feels like a girl. Was Charles born feeling like a girl? Here we see yet a different pattern again. Here, transgender children are in fact the most essentialist. They're more likely to think of gender identity as determined at birth. So in other words, transgender children are less essentialist about gender, but more essentialist about gender identity. So I think the bottom line is, 1, essentialism is a robust tendency in children, even in transgender children, but also it's a flexible and adaptable belief system that varies based on the child's experience. So if kids are picking up on cues from their environment, what are those cues? How is essentialism transmitted? Well, this is a big question, and I expect there are probably many different kinds of cues, but I think an important place to look is language. Now, as I mentioned before, we know that children are surrounded by language from birth. And language is special because it allows us to transmit ideas from one generation to the next. It's what allows us to accumulate knowledge over many generations. And we're the only species that can do this. It's for this reason that evolutionary biologists have suggested that human speech is the decisive step in the origin of specifically human society. So I was interested in how language might contribute to essentialist ideas. To get at this, we've recorded, transcribed, and analyzed many hours of conversations between caregivers and young children. In some of these studies, we set up situations where the categories were surprising to the children so that they would provide the wrong labels and parents would have an opportunity to correct them. And what we found is that parents are, in fact, not giving direct or explicit essentialist messages. They almost never talk about DNA or the insides of animals or why a bat isn't a bird. However, we found that they do provide implicit messages. And one way they do this is with a device that's deceptively simple. This is a device that linguists and philosophers call generics. What's special about generics is that they refer to categories, not individuals. So consider, for example, this simple sentence that a parent said to a child, kitty cats unravel yarn. This doesn't refer to any specific cat or even any specific set of cats, but rather to this abstract idea of cats as a whole. Generics turn out to be highly frequent in the speech that children hear. When we analyze a 10-minute conversation over a picture book, more than 90% of parents use generics. Generics are found in all the world's languages. So here are a couple of examples from some work that we've done from our studies of Mandarin Chinese. Do big rats bite people or not? From Quechua, what do dogs eat? Children's books are full of generics. The elephant is the only mammal that cannot jump. And children themselves start using generics early on, by about 2.5. This is an example from a child in one data set we analyzed who asked, do butterflies have bones? You might be wondering how generics can be a cue to essentialism. They seem so ordinary. Here, I think we have to look at what these simple statements are really saying. I'd like to illustrate with this magazine that I came across in a supermarket checkout line a couple of years ago. The language on the cover is generic: the female mind, the female brain, how women think differently. I suggest that these phrases imply essentialism without coming right out and saying it explicitly. They imply that women are all alike, that they have a single type of mind or brain. There's no mention of variation or differences among women. There's no mention of time, of past, present, or future. These are universalizing claims that gloss over differences and transcend time. Now, as I said, these messages are implicit. They're built into the architecture of human language. But because these messages are implicit, this might help them sneak in these essentialist messages without our even being aware of it. Now, there's a whole deep and interesting story about generics, what they mean, how they're learned, how they're used to reflect on the self. Psychologists, linguists, philosophers, and computer scientists are doing important work on these questions. But for current purposes, I'll just mention one important point, namely, children interpret generics as signaling essentialism. For example, we conducted a study where we taught children a new animal category, Zarpies, and varied whether this was done with generic language or with non-generic language. The children who heard generic language were more likely to essentialize Zarpies, to think that they were alike in non-obvious ways, and to treat them as having a stable inborn essence. Now, clearly, there's much more to learn about how language and all other kinds of cues may give children messages about essentialism. But these studies suggest that young children are highly sensitive not only to what we say to them, but also to subtle differences in how we say it. The title of this talk was rather grand, What Children Can Teach Us About the Human Mind. And I'd like to conclude by taking some modest steps toward making good on this promise. First, essentialism is a basic reasoning bias. As you know, we've found that it begins remarkably early in life. It's very intuitive, it comes to us easily. It doesn't require any special knowledge or special instruction, like learning about microscopes or genetics or chemical structures. This suggests that the consequences of essentialism are also quite basic to human cognition. On the plus side, we intuitively dig deep and search for hidden truths. This might even be like the seed that blossoms into scholarship of all kinds. All of us assume that if we scratch below the surface, we'll find patterns and structure and deeper truths. But at the same time, some of the more problematic aspects of essentialism also seem to be intuitive, such as assuming that people can be sorted into fixed groups with absolute boundaries that tell us something very deep about who an individual is. Early essentialism also tells us something important about children. They're much more capable than once thought. They're capable of transcending their immediate perceptions and considering ideas that are abstract and not obvious. I think this means that children have enormous potential to learn and grow from an early age. And this gets to my third point, which is that essentialist beliefs are malleable. They're sensitive to culture, context, subtle signals, and language. And because of this, I end on a hopeful note. Children's sensitivity to the cues around them means that they're responsive to the kinds of messages that we offer. This means that children can learn the limits to essentialism. And I think finding ways to communicate that to children is a critical direction for future research. I'd like to end with some personal thanks. First, I thank my incredible graduate students and postdocs, past and present, most of whom are pictured here, aside from a few camera-shy people. I also thank all members of the Conceptual Development Lab. One of the most really, truly gratifying aspects of my job is working with students. They continually bring new insights, and I've learned as much from them as they've learned from me. I'm also lucky to have had amazing collaborators throughout the psychology department and university. These collaborations are a great joy. They make research not only intellectually exciting, but also great fun. I am deeply grateful to all of the families, schools, preschools, and museums that have participated in our research, including those who are doing it now by Zoom. It's been a great privilege to learn from your children over the years, and none of this work would be possible without your support. And of course, I thank the University of Michigan for supporting me throughout the past 37 years. I truly can't imagine a more vital and supportive place to be a scholar. And finally, I want to thank those who are most essential to me, my family. My mom, Jane Gelman, moved to Ann Arbor about 15 years ago, and I'm just so lucky to have her living close by. And a very special thanks to my husband and partner of 30 plus years, Bruce Mannheim, and our 3 totally amazing children, Stephanie, Adam, and Ben. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. You're hearing virtual applause right now. What a wonderful lecture, and an opportunity for something that we've all experienced to think about it in a new and more conceptual way. Professor Gelman, we have a number of questions that are coming in from through the audience, and I would like to invite the audience to submit questions, and I will try to convey them to you. I have one big choice here, which is if I ought to acknowledge your special guest that is here. I'll just do one quick shout out, and then we'll move on from there.
This is Calvin.
Wonderful.
Calvin the cat.
If it were a certain moment, we could have another guest on this side of the aisle as well. So to begin, a question that's been offered would be to ask, in the space of categories and essentialism, is if this is the theme of thought for children, or if it is a kind of developmental stage. Like, is there something about a way of thinking that comes before essentialism for a child and something that can come afterwards?
Right. So that's a great question. The research that I talked about was primarily with kids who are at least 4 or 5 years of age. It's very consistent by 4 or 5. In some cases, younger than that, 2.5 or 3. But of course, even a 2.5-year-old has had a couple of years of experience before they, show these reasoning patterns. And so there is this big sort of open question that I would say is still somewhat unresolved as to whether is there a shift to essentialism, but one that happens very early in the first few years of life, or is this somehow really fundamental to how we think and how we categorize even, really from infancy? And the way I think about it is I think that essentialism draws on some reasoning components that are there even in infancy. This includes a search for a causal understanding of the world. Children don't just sort of observe experience and just take it for face value. There's really beautiful evidence that even young infants, when they, observe something happening in the world, if it doesn't conform to their expectations, they search for why is that? What is the underlying cause for that? Another component that I think is there from a very early age is making inferences based on patterns. So again, there's work even with babies showing that if they're like properties that cluster together in categories that you present to them, they then make the inference that new properties will also cluster. It's almost like if there's a set of features that go together, it's almost like a magnet for more features. Another very early sort of capacity that I think sort of gives rise to essentialism is that, again, even infants expect that the adults around them will be more expert than they are. So it's like a division of labor that, I don't yet know, what makes something a dog or a wolf, but I trust that if you give me this label, there's something there. So I think these components are there even prior to the studies that I'm showing. So in that respect, I think it's part and parcel of how we form categories, that we very readily go beyond just kind of the surface appearances and look for these sort of deeper features.
Great, thank you. Our participant, I think, is following up on this, has asked a question made the observation that children tend to anthropomorphize objects. And is there a connection between that and what you were just talking about, that there's sometimes different categories get connected in unusual ways? Oh,
that's a really interesting question. I'm very interested in anthropomorphism, actually, and we've been doing some research on it. It's something that children do very, very readily. They'll take like a little ragdoll and give it a name and, treat it as if it's alive. They're not confused about whether it's alive. They know that it's really just a toy, but we so naturally see the world around us in terms of, the categories that are important, which is other beings, whether they're human or even animal. I have not thought about this with regard to essentialism, but I think, again, to the idea that children are sort of constructing their understanding of the world. They're not just like sort of passively taking in what the people around them are saying to them. Children have their own little like sort of set of understandings that they have to construct for themselves, even though, there's a world of categories out there and such. Children have to construct an understanding, and they do that very creatively. So I think in that sense, I see a commonality between the two.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Some of the connections, the categories that you spoke about seem quite observational, like the red objects that are going together. A participant has asked about to what extent or at what age might these kind of categories extend, not just from those kind of observations, but more to what's underneath in terms of, in particular, like adult motivation. So the question is around, children's awareness of adult motivations and how that affects this categorization.
Oh, yes, very interesting. Let me take the question. There may be a couple pieces to it. So I want to start with this idea of when kids are sensitive to adult motivations in interacting with kids. And that turns out to be something, again, I mean, in a way this fits with that first question that you posed. There's a very early sensitivity in children to when they see like adults around them interacting with them and doing something so simple as maybe reaching for an object, say. Kids interpret these actions very much in terms of the intentions of the actor. So there's work showing that, like, if an adult engages in a reach and they accidentally knock something over versus intentionally knock something over, even babies are sensitive to that, and that will have downstream consequences for how, what they attend to. Or if an adult is, looking across the room at the child and has a certain sort of emotional expression, kids will pick up on that and use that to decide whether it's safe to explore or not, for example. So there's this like nice sort of connection between the capacities of the young child and the signals of those around them that sort of fit together very nicely. And of course, there are developmental changes as well. In terms of categories and when kids are sensitive to the adult intentions, I would say probably sort of the quickest route to the adult intentions that we have are the labels that we provide for things around us. And that's what kids, like, they'll pick up on those labels right away and, make all these kinds of inferences as I've shown. And so in that sense, they're like very powerful, even though they're so ordinary for us.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, which is in the area of language. So you spoke about how important the language of what the child is hearing in terms of cues for developing categorization. The question relates to the fact that language is also co-developing in the child at that time. And can you talk anything about how development of language of the child is related to some of these categories? So, like, are they being co-developed? Does one lead the other? And has that relationship been investigated?
Yes. I do think that they are co-developing. One thing about language it's a whole system with many different layers of organization, everything from sound to meaning to grammar to pragmatics. And what's really interesting is when you look at how that develops, because of course children are incredibly good at learning languages. In fact, they can reach full fluency in a language in such a short period of time, 3 to 4 years, which would put anyone to shame who's trying to learn a language as an adult. And what's so interesting is that children are working on all these systems at once. So it's like they get a little bit of sort of information, say from like the sound patterns, and that provides them with like a little boost in terms of meaning, but then they get a little bit of information from the meaning, and that gives them a boost toward the sound and the grammar. So people sometimes call this like a bootstrapping process, where each little bit is sort of enabling the whole system to develop. And I think concepts are right in there as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for a wonderful, beautiful talk and this very engaging question and answer. So, and congratulations on the Henry Russell Lectureship, Professor Gelman.
Thank you so much.
I would now like to close our program. I would first like to begin by thanking all for attending this virtual Henry Russell lecture, and also all the individuals from the event staff to the selection committee for their participation and work to make this event reality. Congratulations again to our Henry Russell lecturer, Professor Gelman, as well as the Henry Russell Award recipients, Professor Casas, Professor Seck, Professor Davis, and Professor Matthew. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you again for attending this very special event. Good afternoon.